LiberalViewer presents.
So, welcome to the May 17th edition of LiberalViewer Sunday Live Clip Roundup. Again, this week of the pandemic, I hope you are all staying safe and well. Thanks for joining me. This week I have the 14 best, most newsworthy clips I picked out from the Sunday morning news analysis shows from the big five corporate outlets of ABC, NBC, CBS, CNN, and Fox News, the so-called corporate media here in the United States, for what should be a really informative, educational, fair use media criticism and political commentary show for you all tonight. There's a link down in the video description to my clip list of my 14 clips. You can try to follow along reading my notes that I read. Oh, that's not my clip list. Different clip list. And down there's a description of my topic, which is Trump's Blame Obama lie. President Donald Trump has tried avoiding responsibility for his mistakes that cost lives in this coronavirus crisis by blaming states, the World Health Organization, China. Of course, China does deserve some blame, but of course, and also, of course, he's blaming his predecessor, President Barack Obama. And this week, the dishonest Obama blaming reached new levels as Trump asserted this whole Obamagate conspiracy theory that Trump himself could not define, after which Barack Obama himself, participating in the Graduate Together high school graduation online ceremony that took place this weekend, Obama criticized Trump and in a way that Trump himself could never reach, with, an effectiveness Trump himself could never reach. And I discussed that with the 14 clips in this week's live stream. But first I want to start with political comedy, which is comparing Obama's clip from Graduate Together with what Trump said earlier this week, showing, a really deft, rational, well thought out criticism of Trump from President Obama last night in this Graduate Together video that was played on multiple networks, and then compare that to what Trump said last Monday, where he could not define what Obamagate was, but it was really bad and it's been happening for a really long time and it was just ridiculous. But I'll start with the Obama clip. This is from last night. I recorded it from MSNBC, but it played on multiple networks, and he never says Trump, but I think we all know who he's talking about in this clip.
Second, do what you think is right. Doing what feels good, what's convenient, what's easy, that's how little kids think. Unfortunately, a lot of so-called grown-ups, including some with fancy titles and important jobs, still think that way, which is why things are so screwed up. I hope that instead you decide to ground yourself in values that last, like honesty, hard work, responsibility, fairness, generosity, respect for others. You won't get it right every time. You'll make mistakes, like we all do. But if you listen to the truth that's inside yourself, even when it's hard, even when it's inconvenient, people will notice. They'll gravitate towards you. And you'll be part of the solution instead of part of the problem. And finally,
and all the sources of my clips are down in the video description, including you can see an NBC News YouTube video showing that entire Obama 7 or 8 minute address to graduating high school seniors, where he never said the word Trump, but I think we all know who he's talking about and why. He's basically saying that Trump is a whiny little baby who is not honest, who has no sense of self and honesty to himself and integrity. And I was a critic of Obama, even though I voted for Obama. I even gave money to Obama as the candidate to beat John McCain way back in February 2006. No, 2007, February 2007, when Obama announced that he was running for president in Springfield, Illinois. Like a week later, I actually donated to Obama because I thought he was a great candidate, even though he was to the right of me. He was, a little bit conservative, not a liberal really, not a progressive, but a rational, a competent president. I mean, any president looks competent compared to Donald Trump. And I want to juxtapose that last Obama clip with a clip from last Monday. I took this from Trump's press conference where he was asked, you've accused Obama of one of the greatest crimes in presidential history. You've called it, it's Obamagate. What's the crime? What's the crime? And it's like some little kid who gets called on not knowing the right answer, and he's like, "Oh, I know the right answer. You know the right answer. Everybody knows the right answer. It's obvious to everyone. Why are you claiming nobody knows what I'm talking about? Because everybody knows what I'm talking about." And it was, anyway, I'll talk about that a little more. This is almost exactly the same length as the Obama clip, and it's just as awful as that last Obama clip was deft and great, and I will discuss it a little more after we watch that clip together over here.
Mr. President, in one of your Mother's Day tweets, you appear to accuse President Obama of the biggest political crime in American history by far. Those were your words. What crime exactly are you accusing President Obama of committing, and do you believe the Justice Department should prosecute him?
Obamagate. It's been going on for a long time. It's been going on from before I even got elected, and it's a disgrace that it happened. And if you look at what's gone on, and if you look at now all of this information that's being released, and from what I understand, that's only the beginning. Some terrible things happened, and it should never be allowed to happen in our country again. And you'll be seeing what's going on over the coming weeks. I wish you'd write honestly about it, but unfortunately, you choose not to do so. Yeah, John, please.
What is the crime exactly that you're accusing him of?
You know what the crime is. The crime is very obvious to everybody. All you have to do is read the newspapers, except yours. John, please.
I mean, could it be any more obvious that this is some baseless smear that even President Trump himself cannot define in any specific way? It was terrible. It happened for a long time, started before I even got here, and you'll see it covered somewhat in the news summaries. I'm going to show you news summaries from all 5 of the big 5 corporate outlets next. And then I'm going to get to some newsmaker clips. There were 2 representatives of the Trump administration who came on to the big 5 corporate outlets this morning. The Secretary of Labor, Alex Azar, and then Trump's trade advisor, Peter Navarro, were on a couple different shows. I'll show a few clips of them. I'll intermix it with a clip of Nancy Pelosi, and those will be the newsmaker clips. Nancy Pelosi comes at the end after some Peter Navarro and Alex Azar clips. But before I get to that, I want to show you how the different networks summarize the news for the week. And of course, the longest and I guess best news summary was NBC News' Meet the Press, although they had good competition from the shorter but more succinct and incisive news summaries from CNN and ABC this week that I'm going to play afterwards. But there's a lot to talk about in the NBC News Meet the Press news summary from Chuck Todd. 4.5 minutes that I will talk about with you after we watch it together over here.
Good Sunday morning. With the number of confirmed COVID-19 cases approaching 1.5 million and the death toll now nearly 90,000, with anti-shutdown protesters in the streets and with others using the crisis to peddle conspiracies, it can seem as if we are a hopelessly divided nation. We see it here in Washington in the disconnect between Anthony Fauci warning Congress against a too rapid a reopening of the country and a president who has called Fauci's position on reopening schools unacceptable. We see it in Wisconsin, where the state Supreme Court backed the Republican legislature and struck down a Democratic governor's stay-at-home order. And we see it in our split-screen nation, with some people partying like it's 2019, while neighboring states and even neighboring counties remain essentially on lockdown. Of course, even before the coronavirus hit, political division was our pre-existing condition. And all this makes it easy to forget how much most of us are actually pulling in one direction to get us through the worst health and now economic crisis in a century. Like the healthcare workers risking their lives in hospitals, like the grocery clerks working low-wage jobs to make ends meet and help us put food on the table, like the police and millions of others who can't work from home to do their jobs. So maybe this is a good moment to remind ourselves of all those acts of kindness, selflessness, and heroism that do pull us together, even as protesters, partisans, and some high-profile politicians exploit the situation to try to pull us apart.
Vaccine or no vaccine, we're back.
As most states move to partially reopen, the gap is widening between the president's rhetoric and the guidance of many of his top public health experts. President Trump claims
There may be one exception, but all throughout the country, the numbers are coming down rapidly.
in fact, the rate of new reported cases is decreasing in 19 states, remains steady in 21, and is increasing in 10. The CDC director tweeted Friday night that the agency's models all forecast an increase in deaths in the coming weeks, with the death toll exceeding 100,000 by June 1st. Then there's testing.
Florida, many other states have so much testing, the testers are waiting for people to show up. It's great.
But last week, Harvard University researchers found only 9 states had met the testing levels needed to safely reopen. And on a vaccine,
We'd love to see if we could do it prior to the end of the year.
but many scientists, including the president's ousted former top vaccine official, say that is overly optimistic.
I still think 12 to 18 months is an aggressive schedule, and I think it's going to take longer than that.
And on what to expect from the virus.
At some point, it'll go away. It may flare up, and it may not flare up.
When you talk about will this virus just disappear, and as I've said publicly many times, that is just not going to happen.
The tensions between the president and the public health officials were on full display this week as the CDC released a watered-down 6-page decision tree for reopening the country, while the rest of its proposed guidelines remained under review at the White House. And Mr. Trump criticized his top infectious disease expert, Dr. Anthony Fauci, after his warnings about reopening prematurely.
There is a real risk that you will trigger an outbreak that you may not be able to control.
Look, he wants to play all sides of the equation. I was surprised by his answer, actually, because, it's just, to me, it's not an acceptable answer, especially when it comes to schools.
And the president is playing up the political divide as partisan fights break out over when and how to reopen. In Pennsylvania,
We have areas of Pennsylvania that are barely affected, and they want to keep them closed. Can't do that.
Another agenda. It's not just the virus. There's no way it's just this virus.
in Wisconsin, where the conservative majority state Supreme Court this week overturned the Democratic governor's stay-at-home order. President Trump called that a win.
I want my freedom. Basically, I don't think I should be under house arrest.
And in Michigan, where the Republican-controlled legislature is suing the state's Democratic governor.
When people are showing up with guns, when people are showing up with things like, Confederate flags, it tells you that this really isn't about the lockdown.
And joining me now is Dr. Tom Inglesby, he's the director of the Center for Health.
And I don't have any clips of Tom Inglesby, who was on a couple different programs. I think it was on Fox News Sunday and NBC News' Meet the Press. But like I said, that was the most extensive news summary of what's going on with the COVID-19 crisis this week. My one criticism of that NBC News Meet the Press news summary is it didn't really cover this whole blame Obama topic that I'm concentrating on this week, the way that Trump has blamed Obama, not only for how he inherited, the cupboards were bare, old obsolete tests, just for the COVID-19, no plan. That was what Mitch McConnell said and then took back. And then Kayleigh McEnany, the Trump press secretary, came out this week and said that they had a plan that was in a binder, even though, it was so much better than the Obama plan because it was in a binder. But that's not in any of the news summaries. But at least the next two news summaries, the ABC and CNN one, both look at this weird blame Obama tangent or blame Obama dodge distraction that Trump is trying to take on here. And I think actually ABC spends the most time on it in their news summary, which is just over a minute, and I will talk about the ABC News this week with George Stephanopoulos news summary after we watch it together over here.
Good morning and welcome to This Week.
It was a tale of two Saturdays. As the number of COVID cases in the U.S. closed in on 1.5 million, the death toll topped 88,000, and most states took tentative steps to reopen. President Trump was out of sight at Camp David, but not out of mind, dispatching dozens of messages to followers of his Twitter feed, continuing a stream of attacks on his predecessor, at least 160 tweets since last Sunday, that Trump boils down to a single word: Obamagate. Earlier this week, Obama tweeted out a one-word response of his own: vote. But on Saturday, the former president made a rare public appearance. In two virtual commencement addresses, he delivered a pointed critique of how the Trump administration has handled the coronavirus crisis.
More than anything, this pandemic has finally torn back the curtain on the idea that so many of the folks in charge know what they're doing. A lot of them aren't even pretending to be in charge.
And we begin with a response this morning from one of the president's top advisors.
I have a couple Peter Navarro clips, but you saw that ABC News This Week with George Stephanopoulos news summary actually included a clip of Barack Obama in his graduation speech. Well, he did two different graduation speeches, and that wasn't in the clip I showed you, but that was one of the other criticisms of Trump that was really dead on. You can let me know what you think down in the comment section. And then this Jake Tapper news summary from CNN's State of the Union actually got a lot of pushback from the right wing. I saw Breitbart posted an article that then Trump retweeted saying that Jake Tapper was going overboard by saying that there was a Trump smear machine, even though Donald Trump Jr. Claimed that Joe Biden was a pedophile. It was like, see you later. It was like Joe Biden saying, see you later, alligator, and then an alligator replying to him after a while, pedophile. And Donald Trump Jr. retweeted that. That's part of what Jake Tapper's talking about in this next news summary, although it's not really obvious from the way he describes it. And then he also talks about the attacks on Barack Obama, and it definitely is a smear, a baseless smear, and Jake Tapper makes the baseless smear very clear. And of course, the State of the Union this week is opening because 48 of the 50 states are trying to open, and I'll talk about that a little more after we watch that 97-second news summary from Jake Tapper on CNN's State of the Union this morning over here.
Hello, I'm Jake Tapper in Washington, where the State of our Union is opening. This morning, there are nearly 89,000 Americans dead from the coronavirus. The speed at which this virus has killed is just horrifying. Just 2 months ago, the number of dead was 87. But as the death count continues to rise, life during this pandemic is beginning to change. The majority of states across the U.S. are now beginning to take steps to reopen as the number of new cases across the country, is falling. While the nation grapples with how to balance reopening and staying safe, former President Obama made rare public comments criticizing American leadership in two different televised commencement addresses.
More than anything, this pandemic has finally torn back the curtain on the idea that so many of the folks in charge know what they're doing. A lot of them aren't even pretending to be in charge.
The criticism from Obama comes at a time when President Trump and his team are launching an unprecedented smear campaign against any rival, leveling wild and false allegations against critics in the media and political rivals that range from bizarre false conspiracy theories to spreading false allegations of pedophilia to even suggesting one TV anchor committed murder. These smear campaigns are unmoored from reality. They're deranged and indecent. They seem designed, at least in part, to distract us from this horrific health and economic crisis. And it is that pandemic that we're going to focus on today. Joining me now to talk about the pandemic, the Secretary of the Department of Health and Human...
And I will have Alex Azar clips, and there will be some focus on the actual impact of the pandemic. And all the news summaries do focus on the actual impact of the pandemic to some extent or another, that we are over 90,000 deaths, and the United States is probably going to get, well, over 100,000 before the end of the month. Dead people, undercounted dead people from the coronavirus, and who knows how many over 100,000 will die by the time we get to August, September, and then, of course, the second wave in the fall that may or may not happen. It's a huge crisis caused by the incompetence of Donald Trump. And anyway, I think the ABC and CNN news summaries really showed how Trump is trying to distract from his failures in this coronavirus crisis by blaming whoever he can blame, including Barack Obama. The next two news summaries aren't as good, I don't think, in terms of pointing out Trump's ridiculous blame shifting, but CBS News' Face the Nation at least is more journalistic than the Fox News Sunday news summary I'm going to show as the final one, but I've sometimes called CBS News' Face the Nation Fox News Light, and I think Margaret, Brennan, and the reporter Mark Strassman also uphold that that label that I've given to CBS News Face the Nation for many months now in the news summary that you can see and we will talk about after we watch it together over here.
Good morning and welcome to Face the Nation. By the end of today, 48 states will have reopened businesses or loosened stay-at-home orders in some form. Yet none of them have met the federal guidelines of having had 2 weeks of a declining number of cases. At this point, it's hard to know what the impact is yet of the reopenings, either on the number of cases or on the economy. CBS News national correspondent Mark Strassman reports from Atlanta. Mark?
Good morning, Margaret. Georgia is one of 48 states to reopen this weekend, every state but Massachusetts and Connecticut. There's no question that raises the viral risk, but every governor faces competing pressures. This weekend, a reopening America included beaches and parks. Whether it's smart, whether it's safe, is your judgment call. This Northern California restaurant defied a county order to shelter in place.
I've had it. So have all my customers. So is the state of California. Let's open up.
Crowded as it was, virtually no one wore a face mask.
All the people in there sitting next to each other. I mean, I don't know what they're thinking.
They're thinking the economy keeps taking casualties. 36 million workers filed for unemployment in the last 2 months. Since the crisis began, more than 100,000 small businesses have shuttered for good. They're also thinking in the last 2 weeks, America's new COVID cases have declined. But reopening renews worries about a resurgence.
How you act will determine what happens to you, literally.
Behavior is the wild card.
Just because everybody's doing it doesn't make it legal.
Like this scuffle in San Antonio. Store employees confronted a customer who refused to wear a face mask. Texas reported its highest one-day total of cases Saturday, with more businesses set to reopen tomorrow. Health experts still don't know how far the virus has spread. Only 3% of Americans have been tested. Those experts credit the drop in new cases to physical distancing, stay-at-home orders, and face masks. And they shudder, imagining a reopened America looking like this crowded park in San Francisco. Reopening safely takes discipline. This weekend will show whether people have it, whether they respect the viral threat by following all the safety rules, with Memorial Day weekend just ahead. Margaret?
Mark Strassman, thanks. We go now to London and CBS News senior foreign correspondent Elizabeth Palmer.
Margaret?
And I kept that playing to Elizabeth Palmer because, as I've pointed out for several weeks, CBS News' Face the Nation typically doesn't do any news summaries for, this is LiberalViewer Sunday Live Clip Roundup number 369, so this is 7 years plus of me doing my live clip roundups of the Sunday morning news analysis shows, and if you've been watching for the last 7 years, Face the Nation is the one of the 5 outlets that usually doesn't give you a news summary, but since the coronavirus pandemic started, They've not only given you one news summary, first Margaret Brennan's introduction, then Mark Strassman talking about what's going on nationally, and then over to Elizabeth Palmer for what's going on around the world. And if you want to see what Elizabeth Palmer said, there's a link down in the video description to the CBS News Face the Nation YouTube channel, where they take the entire program and cut it up into segments, and you can watch Elizabeth Palmer tell us that the two countries that have the worst outbreaks seem to be Donald Trump's country and Vladimir Putin's country, United States and Russia. But I didn't take clips from that. But I think before I showed the clip, I called Face the Nation Fox News Light, and I think from that news summary, they did cover it journalistically, but with something of a right-wing spin. Not as bad as what you see from Fox News Sunday, because of course if you read The Loudest Voice in the Room, this book I have over here on my right, you know that Fox News is actually a propaganda outlet for the Republican Party, where occasionally journalism happens, you know, as a matter of course. They have some journalists there, but that's not the purpose of the channel. And you can see that with this Fox News Sunday news summary, kind of similar to what you just saw from Face the Nation, not talking about any of the problems from Trump, but if you're following along on my notes here, you'll see that they talk about how there are months of lockdown, how it's time to reopen, and then they really emphasize this whole Project Warp Speed, where there's, I mean, it's almost as if Trump is saying, if everything good is going to happen sometime right after you re-elect me on November 3rd. You know, things are bad now, and, you know, in the past I did really great things, and he exaggerates, you know, greatest economy in the past, you know, he over-exaggerates how great the economy was, which was really just him coasting on Obama's great economy, recovering from the last time Republicans screwed things up and Obama had to come in and fix things. And I guess so that Biden is going to have to talk about how he has experiencing fixing the screw-ups from Republicans leaving the nation in tatters. And anyway, you won't get any of the leaving the nation in tatters subtext in the Fox News Sunday news summary from Chris Wallace going over to David Spunt. And anyway, I will talk about that. Oh, and like I said, they really emphasize this vaccine that apparently is going to happen sometime at the end of the year, which is very coincidentally after you vote for Donald Trump. That's when you're going to get a vaccine that is really overemphasized in the news summary, the final news summary that I will talk about with you after we watch it together over here.
Hello again from Fox News in Washington. After almost 2 months of lockdown, the U.S. is slowly coming out of the worst of the COVID-19 pandemic. The nation now tops more than 1.4 million cases of the coronavirus, but some 48 states have at least partially reopened for business and recreation. And President Trump has launched Operation Warp Speed to find and distribute a vaccine by year's end. In a moment, we'll speak with former CDC Director Dr. Tom Frieden about where we are in dealing with the virus. But first, let's bring in David Spunt with the latest on the reopenings around the country. David.
Chris, good morning. President Trump is at Camp David this weekend. On the agenda, vaccine development. But any sustainable vaccine is months away, and many Americans are tired of waiting. The sun is out, and so are thousands of restless Americans hoping for a sense of normalcy.
I don't want to go home anymore. I want to be out in the sun all day.
Beaches and boardwalks on both sides of the country slowly reopening. In New Jersey and Maryland, families flocked to the water, greeted by social distancing signs. The crowds are a welcome sight to small business owners in the red since February.
We've been closed for probably the last, 2.5 months, so extensively, yeah, we got hurt.
In New York, Governor Andrew Cuomo announced beaches will open next weekend for Memorial Day, but crowds headed to the beach anyway, ignoring social distancing guidelines.
Thank you very much.
On Friday in the Rose Garden, President Trump launched Operation Warp Speed, a plan to develop a sustainable coronavirus vaccine in record time. The operation brings together the private sector, military, and the Department of Health and Human Services. The timeline is ambitious. The White House hoping to have 100 million doses by fall and triple that number by January.
Nobody's seen anything like we're doing now within our country since the Second World War.
Said Americans would have access to a vaccine even if it's developed first by China. Chris, this comes just days after the Department of Homeland Security and FBI warned that China is actively hacking United States vaccine research. Chris?
David Spunt reporting from the White House. David, thank you. Joining us now, former CDC.
And I won't have a clip there of former CDC Director Fredan, but I do have a Fox News Sunday clip coming up next. I think I pretty much pre-criticized that clip as to how there was nothing in there about Trump's attack on Obama. There was nothing in there, about how Trump brought up this whole weird Obamagate conspiracy that he couldn't define, which comes, well, I'll show you something later as to how they not only didn't bring it up, but actively kind of covered it up in the clip after next. But this next clip shows how Chris Wallace, one of the supposed journalists on Fox News Sunday, actually, in a very subtle way, is pushing some of the Trump conspiracy theories. First, this is a clip of Chris Wallace questioning Jared Polis, the Democratic governor of Colorado, and first asking him, are Democrats attacking you for the, mildly good thing you said about how you and Trump have a good working relationship? And then he follows up with this whole question about how Democrats might be politicizing the number of deaths for a partisan reason. And I will talk about that clip a little more after we watch that Fox News Sunday clip with Chris Wallace and the governor of Colorado, Jared Polis, together over here.
I got two more questions. I want to squeeze them both in. You met with President Trump this past week. He spoke highly of the job that you're doing. You spoke highly of the job that he is doing. I wonder, did you get any pushback from some of your fellow Democratic governors, maybe people in the Biden campaign, that perhaps it's not too helpful to be praising President Trump just months before the presidential election?
Well, look, I happen to be a Democrat, but what I've said is he's the president we have, and I owe it to the people of my state who elected me to work with any president to really make sure that we can save lives, get our economy going in our state. We're proud to be getting our economy going in a safe, reasonably safe way. Stores have been open for a couple weeks now in most areas of our state. We're doing this thoughtfully. We're doing this carefully. We value our partnership with the federal government. There's a time for elections. There's a time for politics. This isn't it. It's a time for managing the crisis together, and I'm doing my best to get it done.
Finally, your state just changed the way that you count COVID deaths, and as a result, you lowered the total in Colorado from about 1,100 to 878. One, why did you change that process of how you count them, the criteria for that? And two, do you think the number of deaths should be a political issue as it seems to be becoming?
No, in fact, one of the reasons that we wanted to make sure we reported it out in a better way is to inspire confidence so that it wouldn't be politicized, Chris. These are deaths that should not be politicized. The CDC criteria include anybody who has died with COVID-19. What the people of Colorado and the people of country want to know is how many people died of COVID-19. In our state, about 900 have died from COVID-19. on their death certificate or from the attending physician. About 1,100 have died with it. That those 200 in the middle, it might have been a contributing factor, but it wasn't deemed the sole factor or the only factor in their death. I also want to point out, Chris, that of course there's likely cases that should be counted as COVID deaths that people have missed, doctors have missed. There's probably some of those as well. But the numbers are all fairly close, whether it's 900 or 1,100 in our state, a few 100,000 across the world. We know that this can kill people of all ages. It's particularly dangerous for people in their 70s and 80s, and those with pre-existing conditions. But it's a bad bug.
Governor Polis, thank you. Thanks for taking time out of your weekend to talk with us, sir. Up next, we'll bring in our Sunday group to discuss President Trump's charge that Barack Obama and Joe Biden sought to take down his presidency.
Barack Obama and Joe Biden sought to take down Trump's presidency. That's the charge. It wasn't in the news summary. It didn't really come up. Kind of subtly, there was a question there to Jared Polis, like I said, the governor of Colorado, as to whether Democrats were criticizing him for praising Donald Trump and whether the death rate was being politicized because he actually said it was less than everybody said, although of course it's more. The death rate is actually undercounted because of all, what they call the excess deaths. If you look at the excess deaths, it really points towards underreporting. In fact, in ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos, if you go to the whole program at the link down in the video description, in the last third of the program, you'll hear Nate Silver do a report on why it is that the deaths have been undercounted, although I didn't take that clip. But the next clip I want to show you was teased. You saw Chris Wallace there tease the idea that this whole Obamagate conspiracy was something worth covering. It wasn't in the Fox News Sunday news summary, but of course they didn't show how Trump couldn't even define what Obamagate was. Instead, they showed they showed a clip from Trump's interview with Maria Bartiromo on her program on Fox News channel this morning, and juxtaposed it with Joe Biden sort of changing his story on the whole scandal that you saw Chris Wallace tease in the previous clip as to, Obama and Biden conspired to bring down the Trump presidency, which I will talk about with you a little more after we watch that introduction to the panel from Chris Wallace on Fox News Sunday this morning here.
This was all Obama. This was all Biden. These people were corrupt. The whole thing was corrupt, and we caught them.
I thought you asked me whether or not I had anything to do with him being prosecuted.
Okay.
I'm sorry. I was aware that they asked for an investigation, but that's all I know about it.
President Trump calls Obamagate, pushing that issue, and former Vice President Joe Biden pushing back on one aspect of the alleged scandal, that he was part of an effort to target former Trump National Security Advisor General Michael Flynn. Time now for our Sunday group. GOP strategist Karl Rove.
And I wonder which side Karl Rove is going to be on. Of course, it was pretty ridiculous. There was only one person on the panel who in any way even mentioned the ridiculous things that Trump said about Obamagate, but then not being able to even define what the crime was in Obamagate. And because the Fox News panels are always biased, but that comes up later, and I didn't take a clip of that. But I do want to show some members of the Trump administration. I promised you a couple. Already showed you. I promised you a couple clips of Peter Navarro, the Trump trade advisor, and then a couple clips of his Secretary of Health and Human Services trying to shift the blame away from Trump, sometimes to Obama, sometimes in other directions, China and well, Biden in China. And actually this next clip is Peter Navarro talking to Chuck Todd on NBC News' Meet the Press, where Chuck Todd asks him why, when they did these pandemic role-playing games or tabletop exercises or whatever you want to call them in 2018 and 2019, the after-action report said that they needed more in the stockpile, so why didn't you do anything about it? And you'll see Peter Navarro say, well, we don't want to look back in the rearview mirror. And then he immediately pivots to attacking Barack Obama for what he did in the rearview mirror. And by the end of this clip, he's saying no rearview mirror again. And I will talk about that a little more after we watch that NBC News Meet the Press clip, Chuck Todd interviewing Peter Navarro, but not really ever cross-examining him on how he contradicts himself within this 82-second clip that I will talk about with you, like I said, a little more after we watch it together over here.
Look, I know you want to talk about the strategic national stockpile, but I got to ask you this question. You did a pandemic exercise, and you went through these plans in 18 and 19. Do you have a good explanation for why the after-action reports weren't followed in time to have our stockpiles prepared for this pandemic?
I'm not looking in the rearview mirror right now, Chuck. And this president's just looking straight ahead towards what's going to be a really strong future. The fact of the matter is that we were able to get through the Chinese winter here, the pandemic, with what we had. It was a threadbare FEMA stockpile that was left to us by the previous administration. The one that we're going to have going into the fall is not that. It's going to be, as I said, smarter, bigger, far more resilient. That's what I'm doing, Chuck. My focus here, I came here to kind of work on trade policy issues, and somehow I became quartermaster and supply clerk. But it's been a beautiful thing working with private industry to see how innovative the companies of America can be, and how the manufacturing platforms of this country, if we just give them some lift, how they can really develop, like the GM example I told you about earlier.
I want to ask you quickly about the CDC.
So, like I said, no cross-examination from Chuck Todd of Peter Navarro there as to him contradicting himself within that 82-second clip saying, I don't want to look in the rearview mirror, but back in the rearview mirror, it's really Obama's fault. And this next clip is a little bit better. It's also longer. George Stephanopoulos cross-examining Peter Navarro on ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos. In this clip, it actually comes right after. This is clip number 11, which comes right after clip number 4. That's one of the ABC News This Week with George Stephanopoulos news summary. One of the reasons I show the news summaries is because the newsmakers actually watch the news summaries and respond to them. You'll see Peter Navarro responding to the news summary in which George Stephanopoulos showed one of Obama's Graduate Together clips, and then you'll hear George Stephanopoulos actually summarize the clip I showed you. Here, I'll play it again for you. Where he said that the reason things were screwed up was because people were acting like big babies. Well, that's not what George Stephanopoulos says, but I think that's what Obama said in this clip.
Do what you think is right. Doing what feels good, what's convenient, what's easy, that's how little kids think. Unfortunately, a lot of so-called grown-ups, including some with fancy titles and important jobs, still think that way, which is why things are so screwed up.
And so, yeah, that was the clip I showed you earlier, which George Stephanopoulos summarizes for Peter Navarro here. And Peter Navarro, you'll see, again, blames Obama, Biden, and then by the end, I edit out a little bit of this where George Stephanopoulos asked Peter Navarro if China, when he blames China, does he mean China intentionally spread the virus? And I cut that part out, but then there's more than enough China blame. at the end of the clip I will talk about with you after we watch it together over here.
President Obama continued this in his second commencement address last night, suggesting that things are screwed up because people in charge are taking the easy way out. Your response?
Well, I'm glad Mr. Obama has a new job as Joe Biden's press secretary. I note for the record that in his speech that I read, there was no mention of manufacturing, no mention of China. As far as I'm concerned, his administration was a kumbaya of incompetence in which we saw millions of manufacturing jobs go off to China. His new normal was a flat line in terms of wage growth. And I'm happy to report that this president, Donald J. Trump, in 3.5 years, built the most beautiful economy in modern history. And the Chinese did take that down in about 30 days, but we are in the process right now of rebuilding that. And this president, Donald J. Trump, is the one who has the skills to do so. Because you know what, George, what we're going to do is we're going to go back to the future here. Buy American, deregulate, and innovate. What do I mean by that? Bring the jobs home, make it here.
You say, let's pick up on that, because on Thursday, Vice President Biden spoke out on this and took on President Trump directly. Let's listen.
The truth is, Trump was praising the Chinese government, downplaying the threat to the American people. As I said, as I was warning the need to get the people into China to see what was actually going on. And the Chinese government's word, we squandered critical time. And so I just don't. And now he's trying to play this China card.
The vice president had an op-ed in USA Today in January. He warned in February. All through the month of February, President Trump was praising President Xi of China. He was saying he trusts President Xi of China. He was saying President Xi of China was being transparent. That's why Vice President Biden says that the president was downplaying the threat from China.
Yeah, well, Joe Biden's got 40 years of sucking up to the Chinese, including 8 years as vice president. We all know about the $1 billion that his son took from the Chinese.
That's just not factual, sir. That is not a fact. He did not take $1 billion from the Chinese.
Went into that hedge fund. But be that as it may, I do think this election is going to be a referendum in many ways on China. And here's what we know, George. The Pew Research Group did a poll which showed that over 90% of the American public think that China is a threat in some way, and over 70% have an unfavorable opinion. In my judgment, the behavior of the Chinese Communist Party over the last 3 months, particularly in terms of unleashing this pandemic, I think they're shooting for 100% negative views. So we'll have Joe Biden, long friend of China, President Donald J. Trump, the only president in modern history to stand up to China, going into November. And it's what this is going to be about. It's not going to be about the pandemic. It's going to be about jobs, because what we have to do now is rebuild the economy.
And I think in the end of that clip, you can definitely see the beginnings of how the Trump campaign is going to try to run against Joe Biden in the times of this pandemic. It's going to be the pandemic is the fault of China. Joe Biden has been soft on China. You've even heard Trump say, if Biden is elected, China's going to own this country. And you can see how awful, how Trump is saying that China is responsible, all the blame. It's not that China didn't do anything wrong. China, is an authoritarian state that has transparency problems, that punishes people for being whistleblowers. Of course, Trump is sort of leaning in that direction as well. That's the problem, that Trump is becoming too much. Trump is making the United States more like China, more authoritarian. That doesn't mean China is good. It's that we think China is bad and we don't want to be more like China. That's the whole point. But so that's the whole China blaming, and kudos to George Stephanopoulos for pointing out to Peter Navarro there that this idea that Trump is trying to popularize since the whole Ukraine impeachment, when he said, China, you should investigate Joe Biden and Hunter Biden because China gave $1 billion to Hunter Biden. Well, that's not really true. And George Stephanopoulos pointed that out to his credit in that smear from Peter Navarro. That's the second Peter Navarro clip. I now have two Alex Azar clips. Alex Azar is the Secretary of Health and Human Services in the Trump administration. He was on CNN's State of the Union with Jake Tapper. He was on CBS News' Face the Nation. Both trying to find, in both cases, trying to find ways to shift blame for the coronavirus crisis. First, talking to Jake Tapper, I pick this up kind of in the middle where Jake Tapper says, well, you're saying how we're having this great success, but, you know, we're at 90,000 deaths. That's nothing to celebrate. And Alex Azar agrees with that, but then says, well, you know, one of the reasons we have so many deaths is because the American people are like too fat, especially like the minorities, the African Americans. I'm not making that up. He actually says the word minority and the word African American and diverse, and saying they're too fat and diabetic, and that's one of the reasons so many are dying. And Jake Tapper calls him on it. You're blaming the American people when Trump is to blame for doing nothing for the month of February and March. And anyway, I'll talk about that a little more after we watch that first great Alex Azar cross-examination from Jake Tapper on CNN's State of the Union this morning over here.
I understand that, but we have more, we have almost 90,000 Americans who are now dead because of this. I don't think that this is anything to celebrate, how we handle this as a country.
Jake, you can't celebrate a single death. Every death is a tragedy, but the results could have been vastly, vastly worse. It's also important to remember, Jake, as we
But it's worse for us than it is for anyone else.
No, that's actually not factually correct. When you look at mortality rates, that's simply not correct as a percent of diagnosed cases, Jake. That every death is
just looking
tragic.
at the number of dead bodies.
Every death is tragic, but we have maintained our healthcare burden within the capacity of our system to actually deal with it. Unfortunately, the American population is a very diverse, and it is a population with significant unhealthy comorbidities that do make many individuals in our communities, in particular African American minority communities, particularly at risk here because of significant underlying disease, health disparities, and disease comorbidities. And that is an unfortunate legacy in our healthcare system that we certainly do need to address. But no, the response here in the United States has been historic to keep this within our healthcare capacity, even in New York City, to keep this within capacity is genuinely a historic result.
I want to give you an opportunity to clear it up, because it sounded like you were saying that the reason that there are so many dead Americans is because we're unhealthier than the rest of the world, and I know that's not what you meant.
No, I think that we have a significantly disproportionate burden of comorbidities in the United States: obesity, hypertension, diabetes. These are demonstrated facts that do make us at risk for any type of disease burden.
Sure, of course, but that doesn't mean it's the fault of the American people that our government failed to take adequate steps in February.
Oh no, Jake, please don't distort. No, this is not about fault. It's about simple epidemiology, and stating that if we have hypertension, if we have diabetes, we present with greater risk of severe complications from this coronavirus. That's all I was saying, and you know that. This is not, one doesn't blame an individual for their health conditions. That would be absurd. It's simply a statement that we do have greater risk profiles here in the United States, and this is why we've all highlighted the Surgeon General, the President. We've highlighted the special disease burden and risk factors in a lot of our communities that we've got to address.
Yeah, no, of course, no one would dispute that. Let me ask you one last question. There's a lot of disinformation out there, as you know. Last night on cable, someone said that the shutdowns that the states have taken, the governors, are just an effort to hurt President Trump by preventing him from holding rallies. The same person said the day after Election Day, the virus will disappear. I know you know that's not true. What's your response to that?
I just think we need to have balanced, accurate information out there. That's all I and our public health leaders are trying to do, is to present the fact that we're now in a position where we can be reopening. We want to take safe and appropriate measures. The president has laid out very balanced criteria and approaches that he suggests states follow to do that. And that's the path. Then that's the path forward that we need to take. And I think hyperbolic rhetoric on any side is not appropriate. These aren't partisan issues. This is just health and economic welfare for our citizens.
Exactly. But you would agree that governors did not take these steps to shut down their states because they were trying to hurt President Trump. They were trying to protect the lives of their citizens.
I find that it's better not to try to impugn individuals' motives. The president, the vice president, and I have had superb working relationships with the governors across this country, from whether red state or blue state. We've all been working in partnership to try to help the American people, and we're going to keep doing that.
All right, Secretary Azar, I really appreciate.
And yeah, no, that was a great cross-examination of Alex Azar by Jake Tapper, and you know, he never mentioned the name Eric Trump when he was at the end of that cross-examination. When he was talking about Eric Trump was on Judge Jeanine Pirro's Justice with Jeanine Pirro on Fox News Sunday, or Fox News on Saturday actually, and he said that the whole coronavirus thing was a conspiracy to stop Donald Trump from being able to hold rallies, and it was going to magically disappear at the right after November 3rd. And you notice that in that cross-examination of Alex Azar, Jake Tapper never said the words Eric Trump. But if you were paying close attention to the video, you would notice that Eric Trump actually appeared in the chyron there. Here, I took a screenshot of it here. And that's pretty stealthy from CNN that they put Eric Trump in the chyron as to the bogus stuff he said that Jake Tapper's cross-examining the Secretary of Health and Human Services, Alex Azar, about. And he gets Alex Azar to say, well, you know, that's ridiculous. That's partisan rhetoric. We shouldn't. But never really says it came from Eric Trump, the least popular son of Donald Trump, I guess. I don't know. You can let me know what you think down in the comment section. And then I have one more Alex Azar clip here. It's Alex Azar on CBS News's Face the Nation, talking about the oldest Donald Trump blame Obama dodge on the coronavirus crisis that you heard from the very beginning. He says, well, you know, I inherited these outdated, obsolete testing tests from the Obama administration, and we had to build from nothing. And he also says the cupboards were bare, you know, just like there was no ammunition in the military, and then no tests, and nothing in the stockpile. And that all comes up in this next clip, especially about the testing, where Margaret Brennan makes Alex Azar defend the CDC. Their whole purpose is to have like a canary in the coal mine test that shows that something's happening, but they're not. The CDC isn't supposed to be able to have tests available to test every American. They're just supposed to have like a signal that something bad is about to happen. And even then, they had tests that had all these false positives and problems. And anyway, Margaret Brennan gets Alex Azar to defend the CDC against attacks from Peter Navarro. But of course, it's Trump saying that he inherited this outdated, obsolete system. And he's talking about the tests of the CDC. And of course, it's totally ridiculous to blame Barack Obama for not having a test for a virus that didn't exist when Barack Obama was president. He left plans for how to deal with the pandemic. He left all sorts of good things, but he couldn't have left a test for a virus that didn't exist. And here's Alex Azar defending his CDC against attacks from Trump and other parts of the Trump administration in the penultimate, second to last news clip for the program tonight over here.
To you, the CDC has been blamed for failure and mistakes with testing. Do you take responsibility for that?
So we were confronting a situation here that's completely novel. There has never been a national immediate testing regime across public and private sectors. We have had to literally build this from the ground up, Margaret. That's what folks don't quite understand here, is that the CDC's role is to develop an initial, fairly low throughput public health test that health labs will do for initial diagnosis. But then we count on the private sector actually to scale up these high throughput, large test capacities. And that's what we've done in historic time. You know, these tests normally would take 6 to 9 months to get.
You don't take responsibility for any problems that the CDC has admitted to having had. What problem did the CDC have? The CDC had an issue as they scaled up manufacturing of tests to get them out to about 90 public health labs. There was apparently a contamination at an end stage there on the third part of the reagent that never led to false negatives or false positives. But that prevented some of the scale up for a couple of weeks. But that was never going to be the backbone of testing, of broad mass testing in the United States, Margaret. That depends on the companies like Abbott and Roche and Thermo Fisher through these high throughput tests. I just want to clarify, because your colleague, Peter Navarro, has said that the CDC let the country down. Given the CDC reports up to you, do you take responsibility for that? What do you think about that?
I don't believe the CDC let this country down. I believe the CDC serves an important public health role, and what was always critical was to get the private sector to the table.
All right. Mr. Secretary, thank you for your time.
Thank you, Margaret.
And that was, like I said, Alex Azar, the Secretary of Health and Human Services, under which the CDC resides, trying to defend the CDC and its, like I said, canary in the coal mine testing. But the inability to ramp up that testing also has to do with the Trump budget, which is something that Nancy Pelosi points out in the final news clip I want to show you. Also from CBS News' Face the Nation, where Margaret Brennan asks the Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, to referee between different parts of the Trump administration. Peter Navarro blaming the CDC, and of course Trump blaming the CDC when he says he inherited a, obsolete, broken system of testing, when what he really inherited was a CDC that was supposed to be the canary in the coal mine, like a signal test that tells you it's time to get the testing, ramp up on the testing. And then Trump wasted February and March and didn't do anything about the testing. And anyway, here's Margaret Brennan asking Nancy Pelosi about that, and she briefly talks about the failure of testing by Trump's budget not funding the CDC, and then goes on to other topics in the final news clip for tonight over here.
Just passed, but I want to quickly get your reaction to the White House. One White House advisor saying that the CDC let the American people down with testing. You just heard the Health and Human Services Secretary say he does not believe that is the case. What do you think happened here? Did the CDC let the American people down?
Well, the CDC was grossly cut in the president's budget. But setting aside how we got here, let's talk about how we go forward. It is important for us. The American people want the economy to open up. We all do. We want our societies to open up. We all do. And in order to do that, we have testing, tracing, treatment, and isolation. And that is the path. It's what the scientists advise. That is what we do in the HEROES Act. We talk about how we can get there with a plan. We haven't had a plan. Let's go forward in a bipartisan way to have a plan to test. We have no idea the size of this challenge to our country because we have not sufficiently tested. Let's test so that we can diagnose, and then we can treat, and then decrease the number of people who have died. Imagine that 90,000 Americans, almost 90,000 Americans, have lost their lives to this awful villain. We, whatever our differences, have to join together to fight this enemy to the lives and the livelihood of the American people. 90,000 people. We send our condolences and our prayers to their families. We will always carry them in our hearts. Sadly, the number is projected to even grow, and then nearly 1.5 million people infected. So we have a common enemy, and as we go forward, let's do so with a strategic plan, a plan that has a timetable, it has a goal, a timetable, benchmarks, and the rest to get the job done for the American people.
I want to ask about your plan, because as you just mentioned, that HEROES Act is the $3 trillion.
And, you know, that was a lot more coherent argument and call to unity from the Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, than anything I've seen from Donald Trump. Never mind what we've seen from Barack Obama responding to this weird Trump's blame Obama lie that is the topic of my live stream tonight. And anyway, I think with the 14 clips I showed you and my political commentary and media criticism, I've made it pretty apparent that the Obamagate, Obama lie, blame Obama, Trump dodge is pretty ridiculous. And when I watch clips of President Barack Obama, even though I was a critic of Obama from the left, compared to our current president, it makes me think, you know, why am I living in this timeline? Why am I living in the, you know, evil Biff ruling the world timeline in Back to the Future? No, I wish I was still back in the Barack Obama, even President Hillary Clinton timeline. But you can let me know what you think down in the comment section. I'm going to finish up the show in just a minute. I do have a bonus Dash and Sandy clip for you all. Some people like to call it the Dandy clip. My cat Dash and my dog Sandy. I notice I haven't gotten any super chat contributions in the live stream this week, which is fine. I appreciate when I get those super chat contributions. It's kind of sad that super chat contributions are the largest part of my YouTube revenue week after week, but they're not the most efficient way of contributing to my YouTube channel. If you appreciate the 8 to 10 hours I spent this Sunday and every Sunday for the last 369 Sundays, more than 7 years now, picking out the best clips, adding my criticism and commentary. If you want to support me continuing to do that, I think the most supportive way to do that is to become one of my monthly Patreon supporters, Patreon patrons. There's a link down in the video description for that. There's also a join button down below the video. You can click join, and at different levels, at the lowest level, well, at $1 or $2, you can just support my channel. Above that, there's a higher level where you can get this hashtag LiberalViewer weatherproof vinyl sticker that I will send you, and then at an even higher level, you'll get the sticker and this ACLU Constitution. I appreciate any level of support financially at the links down in the video description, or just supportive comments, thumbs up, subscribing to my channel, and I will continue to bring you this Sunday live clip roundup at least for the rest of 2020, maybe longer if I get some more financial support. But before I finish, I did promise you a bonus Dash and Sandy clip, and this is a clip I took earlier while I was watching a MSNBC show that comes after the Sunday news analysis shows, where I take my clips. This is actually in the last few hours before my live stream. I often watch KCDC on MSNBC, and if you wonder, is the Dash and Sandy clip actually from before the show? Well, You will hear that news program in the background, which verifies it happened in just a few hours before my live stream. Sandy, the dog, is sleeping in her bed. Dash seems to want to go out the door and then chickens out at the last minute in the Dash and Sandy clip you can see over here.
To take a really hard look at antitrust policies that made this possible. These four companies shouldn't have the kind of power they do.
You mentioned the idea that we eat so much, 9 ounces of meat per day on average, partly.
And there you can see Dash left me with the door open, but no Dash, no Sandy to go out the door. It's one of those disappointments that I've learned to live with. It's not the worst disappointment, but if you want to tell me about what is disappointing you in your pet life or in your political life or in any other way, you can let me know down in the comment section. That's my final clip, my Dash and Sandy, my dandy clip, as it were, as some people like to call it. I almost uploaded a video this last week. David Spunt, who did the reporting for Fox News Sunday, he was talking about this firing of the inspectors general, and for some reason he couldn't say that Trump did something unlawful. He was reading a quote that said that Trump did something unlawful, and instead of unlawful, he said awful. And I almost made it into a brief video titled Fox News Can't Say Trump Did Something Unlawful. Maybe I'll still do that. You can let me know what you think about whether I should upload that edited, produced video sometime in the next couple days. Otherwise, if I have no other reason to upload a video during the week, I will be back next Sunday and every Sunday for at least the rest of 2020. And anyway, until then, I guess I will be seeing all of you around the internet.